When I was a kid around 9 or 10, my dad got a really high-paying job that forced us to move from middle of nowhere Pennsylvania to Brookmont, Maryland. I say forced, but that's probably not the best way to describe what happened in reality. My parents were thrilled to make the move. It was a decision they barely thought about. In the span of about a month, we went from this tiny rundown house in a relatively low-income area to a massive property in one of Maryland's nicest suburbs. You might be wondering how I felt about the whole thing at that age. I was a pretty antisocial kid and mostly kept to myself, so it's not like I was leaving a lifelong friends behind. I didn't really have any to begin with. Years later, my parents would tell me that the prospect of giving me a fresh start was one of the reasons they were so willing to uproot entire lives. But that's neither here nor there. The move didn't bother me much, and I was able to adjust pretty quickly. It's not like adjusting was very difficult given the circumstances, though like I said, the house was huge, and even my 10-year-old self could pick up on the fact that we wouldn't be struggling to make ends meet anymore. I'm not going to bore you about the pointless details about the inside of the house. I will only tell you what you need to know. I had 2 older brothers, Sean and Harold. The backyard was easily our favorite part. It had a big plot of twisting hedges that made for perfect games of hide and seek, tag, or whatever else we came up with. But the best feature by far was the tree house at the right edge of the property. Each house on the block was separated by a decently large cluster of tall trees, and the treehouse was situated directly within in that patch. I say treehouse, but it was more like a tree castle. It wasn't your dad's run-of-the-mill weekend projects. It was massive, spanning 6 or 7 adjacent trees. It had 3 different levels and an actual staircase built into it. Not those flimsy planks you're probably used to seeing. It was obvious professional had built it for a while. My brothers and I played in the treehouse every day. It was always the highlight of our day. But eventually my brothers got bored of the treehouse. They were older and in that awful teenage phase where nothing was cool anymore. Eventually, I was the only one who played up there, which kind of sucks. I was really torn up about basically being abandoned up there, but my brothers refused to come back no matter what I said. One day, I climbed up into the treehouse and found a folded piece of paper sitting in the corner. To this day, I still remember the exact words written on that first note. It said, "Hello, I am the Marshmallow Man. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" I was the happiest kid alive. I assumed it was one of my brothers playing a game with me, so I played along, hoping to enter them in the treehouse. There was a stack of paper in the treehouse that hadn't been there before, so I eagerly picked up one of the markers we had in there and wrote back, leaving a little note with my name. I placed it where I'd found the first one. Excited to play this new game. That night, I wanted to ask my brothers which of them was the Marshmallow Man, but I was afraid they would stop playing if I said anything, so I kept quiet for the next few days. I would come home from school and run straight to the treehouse. Each time, there'd be another note waiting for me. At first, the notes were innocent and sounded exactly like stuff my brothers would say. I was having a lot of fun with it, but as the days went on, the notes got stranger. The Marshmallow Man started asking me increasingly personal questions that I didn't fully understand, things that didn't make sense for my brothers to ask, like, "What's your favorite time of day to play outside?" or "What do you usually eat for breakfast?" I don't remember every question he asked, but one of them that will always stick with me was, "Which window in the house is your bedroom?" I look back at that exact question and literally feel sick to my stomach. At the time, I still didn't too much of it. I assumed it was still one of my brothers, so I answered every question without hesitation, but the next note was so unsettling that I couldn't keep quiet anymore. It was something like, "What do your pajamas smell like?" or something nasty along those lines. I stormed inside and confronted my brothers, demanding to know which of them was behind the notes. They both started laughing at me and denied it. Both of them swore there was no such thing as the Marshmallow Man and started making fun of me for still playing make-believe. I started crying and ran out of the room. I remember being a mixture of sad and angry. I knew one of them had to be lying. Instead of going to my parents, I hatched a plan to catch them. In the ACT, I was not prepared for what was about to happen that night. As I lay in bed, I heard tapping at my window. I froze, feeling my heart start to beat out of my chest. I was already scared of the dark to begin with, so the tapping added a layer of fear that I couldn't deal with. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I pulled back the window curtains and almost screamed. Taped to the outside of my window were dozens of marshmallows. It had to be my brothers. I was so angry this wasn't funny anymore. I decided I would catch them red-handed. The next night, I pretended like I hadn't noticed the marshmallows and didn't say a thing to either of them. All day later, that night, I was ready when the clang started again. I jumped out of bed and yanked the curtains open, ready to yell at them. But it wasn't my brothers. On the other side of the glass was a man, an old, disgusting man with yellow eyes and what looked like rotting teeth. He had patchy hair on his head and smiled at me when he noticed me looking. I don't think I have ever screamed louder in my life. I felt like I was going to die. In that moment, my parents came running, but by the time they got to my room, the man was gone. It was a huge thing. The police searched the property, coming through every inch of the yard and treehouse, but they didn't find anything. They even checked the surrounding area, but that man was never found. Some of our neighbors came outside to see what was going on and reacted in horror when my parents filled them in. I told the police and my parents everything I knew, but there wasn't much I could even say. They took the notes in as evidence, but I doubt they really did anything with them. Then man never came back. My parents told me to never play in the treehouse again, but it's not like I wanted to after that incident anyway. I moved out of that house a while ago, but my parents still live there, and I always take an extra long look at the treehouse whenever I am back. This remains one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. This memory has been on my mind a lot lately. When I was a visitor house, I used to sit for a family for years when they would go on annual family vacations. I have a few years I add in the mature mind other scary, creepy experiences. But the one I want to talk about today was the one that forced me to quit house sitting for them, an immature mind. I was in my 20s and was trying to make an estimate. House sitting was one of the many side hustles I had. The family would be going an immature mind on a 2-week vacation abroad and wouldn't have any service. So if anything went wrong, I would have to call the police or their police or anything relatives. And in a mature mind, depending on the situation, please keep in mind that I've already had a few creepy experiences with their house pretty prayer, but to this, the experience, an immature mind, never scary enough to me, because they paid me used to worry why you've at animal shelter, so I was well versed in animal care. Animal shelter, and an immature mind. knew about cat, but this family had 4 cats, who were all very well behaved. For the first few days, all was well. Eyes well, slept in the cave, faved in the guest, nostrils and an immature mind, bedroom, and went to school, because they lived close enough to where I could just walked to class and didn't have for foes to clough for their hair, not in mind, parking or bring lunch, since I could just go back to their place. Then the issues began after a few my days. My boyfriend at the time came over, not in muscles and an immature mind, with dinner to keep me company, as he knew I was always a bit creeped out by the house. We sat in the guest bedroom and watched tea for VV, an immature mind, few hours eating, until he said he needed to go home. Sometimes he would sleep over, but he told me on this particular night that a sleepover that stronged him immature mind, feeling he needed to sleep and go home. He urged me to go homes because that gut feeling he had bad was really that at point it wine heat was not in muzzled around midnight, and to be honest, I didn't want to go home. To put it bluntly, I have a complicated home life and didn't get along life and an immature mind. Parents, the only time I would get a break from home was the annual house sitting once a year, and I didn't like wasting it my eye only and an immature mind. Sibling, who also my best friend, moved out due to the toxicity, and honestly home without them anymore. I told him that time will and an nature mind be fine, and I will lock. He left. He was still really uneasy and tried to persuade me to go home once again. Then to explain again. He tried me to explain, not in muscles and an image mind. Well, he had slept over before for some reason, and tonight the house just felt unsettling. I thought it was because the house was over a century. I thought the house century, nulls, and an immature mind. Old, but it was just renovated, so I felt better, and I reminded him that home, security alarm, the alarm, that I always said. Neighborhood was safe, and an immature mind. I had 4 friendly cats with me. He reluctantly left and drove home, and that was when it happening. I shut all the doors and windows, and an immature mind. Locked everything and set security alarm. Once I got comfortable in bed, the TV started to turn on by itself. We weren't we were just using an immature mind. TV, so I thought I accidentally sat on the remote. But I saw the remote on the stern stand. I quickly turned it off just as it turned. When the knife and mine turned back on, I thought it was strange, since the TV was working entire night, the entire night. But it was even stranger, that wins even strangely, when the T and an immature mind turned on by itself. It went to this off channel, like it was just black and white. It had no signal, so I kept turning it off, and it matured. And mind kept turning. I began to freak out and unplug the TV entirely, even though I had creepy experiences before this house, an immature mind. One had never happened before. I told myself that the house was just renovated. Maybe there were some wiring issues, as I says. I still go home. Still didn't go home. Not in muscles and an immature mind. And went and slept on the couch instead. And the next day, my boyfriend came over again. I told her what happened about Tom, the night before, and he told me in her mind. I should have just went home. I was pretty freaked out, but honestly, it was still not as bad as having to deal with my family. My family, not in much of mine, that night. We had dinner together in the living room for moving and moving this next part. I do speed. Have to explain the house structure and immature mind. The house is 2 floors. There's the first floor where you come in through the front door straight into the living room and the floam, and the second floor at an immature mind is actually the basement, which is essentially a big living room with another room that can be used as a spare bathroom. The stairs leading an immature mind. Downstairs are incredibly creaky. I don't understand why they didn't fix during the renovation. As for the locations, they loved. As for the fix, they love to be an everywhere mind. Everywhere, and they all had wanted to be a reality where they want the personally held, but not necessarily held or cuddled. Hell, they were held or cuddled. You were all an immature mind. Pretty calm cats that liked quieter environments. Of the 4 cats, there was one cat that was the youngest at around 3 years old. And an immature mind was just a bit smaller than the other. That night, watch the mold as we booze. My blood growled as I heard sounds, from movies from the basement, not in muscles and an image mind. That sounded like an infant crying. My boyfriend froze as he slowly turned to look at me, as if signaling to me silently if I hurling it too silently. An immature mind remembered from my time, working wartime in the animal shelter. During my training, that's cats sound babies, especially sound like babies, especially if they're in. They are